views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Okay, we have a very big show for you today. I'm David Lesch, your host of today's verdict. 3 different areas of the law. Criminal defense attorney will be here to talk to us about incarcerations, prisons, things that have been going on with respect to the criminal arena, especially with the new administration. Second up, we have a law professor talk about the Biden administration and all things constitutional, especially when it comes to immigration. And finally, returning to us is Andrew Rigie. He is the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance. Give us an update on what's going on within our city with respect to restaurants. So as you can see, we have much to get to. Stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. Back to today's verdict. We're here with Professor César García Hernández, and I have to tell you, I've been practicing that for a while. It's not happening. Professor, thanks for being here today.
It's my pleasure, David.
All right, now, Professor, you're with the University of Denver. I'm sure you're getting a lot of calls and a lot of discussions about the change in terms of the administration and how that affects immigration, and that's why we have you on today. Just on the onset, does it look like it's a new day for us with respect to the immigration policies, or is it the same old story?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that we're talking of just about 2 weeks since President Biden, Vice President Harris took office, and they've certainly kept me busy. They've kept everyone who is in the immigration world very busy with a slew of executive orders and memos and announcements. And some of these are really, I think, welcome changes. The way in which the president and vice president and top officials in the administration talk about human beings, talk about migrants, is a radical departure from the Trump era, and one that is, I think, a very, very meaningful one. We saw the effects, very real effects of the dehumanizing rhetoric in the past, and now we're also turning to actual policies, executive orders, and policy directives that are being implemented, and some that are already stalled in the courts. And to some degree, there is a shift in the way in which this administration is trying to devote its immigration law enforcement resources. It tried, for example, to pause deportations for 100 days. Already, it's run up against some headwinds led by the state of Texas, the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, and a very receptive, who received a very receptive audience from a Trump-appointed federal judge in Texas. And so that pause is itself on pause right now. And the question that remains is, to what extent is the Biden-Harris administration willing to expend its political capital in these early days of the administration, pushing legislatively, but also pushing on those executive fronts within the Department of Homeland Security when it runs up against resistance, whether it's from state attorneys general like Paxton or from members of Congress.
Well, here, in New York, it's pretty much been a little bit of a safe haven, certainly for the people in the Bronx and throughout New York City. But you never know. Certainly with the deportations, if you do something wrong, you could easily find yourself on a plane back to your host country. In terms of rhetoric, I know we have executive orders that have been signed, but how much pushback do you believe we're going to get from the Republicans based on the first 100 days?
There's absolutely nothing that the Biden-Harris administration can do short of simply plugging and playing the Trump administration's policies that's not going to get derided as amnesty and no borders. amnesty and open borders. We've already seen that coming from a handful of Republican members of the Senate. Josh Hawley and Marco Rubio in particular have both derided the Biden administration's proposed legislation even before anyone has actually seen the proposed legislation. So I can only imagine what they're going to say once they actually lay their hands on the actual piece of legislation that the Biden administration is trying to steer through the legislative chamber. So I think if the new administration's goal is to curry favor with Republicans when it comes to immigration reform, sadly that's a tactic that the Obama administration tried when, of course, the current president was vice president, and one that I hope. I am hopeful that President Biden has learned from the years-long stall tactics that the Republican Party exercised, and it seems to me that there are some indications to believe that President Biden actually did learn those lessons from his last time in the White House as vice president.
You know, Professor, a lot of times it's a matter of optics, and it's how it's viewed by the country, and certainly the separating of mothers from their children during the times down south by the border. Do you think that's going to continue, or do you think that it's really going to be the same old story again, where, you know, in the deportation centers, they're not really given a chance to speak to an attorney? You know, the children are possibly traumatized for the rest of their lives. What's your take on that?
Yeah, the way the immigration law system is set up, there inevitably people are going to be deported and detained without ever talking to a lawyer. The Congress has steadfastly refused to fund a public defense system, national public defense system, for people who are facing the possibility of deportation, including people who are detained while they're going through that process. And so there is inevitably, so long as we have a federal government that is intent on detaining and deporting people, some of those people will be facing that fate on their own, because private funding is simply too limited. The philanthropy is too limited, and in places like South Texas, where I was born and raised in McAllen, Texas, which was the epicenter of the Trump administration's family separation policy in 2017. These are communities that are under-resourced in almost every way, including when it comes to the availability of lawyers and legal services. And that's not changing anytime soon under the Biden administration, unless we see a very concerted effort to get Congress to enact a significant funding stream. And I think certainly if we were to take some of the money that is currently being devoted to enforcing immigration law through ICE or the Border Patrol and repurpose it for purposes of actually helping people navigate what is a very complicated legal process, then I think we could do exactly this. We could provide lawyers, we could provide social workers, we could provide case managers, but until we see the political capital being used that way, I think we shouldn't hold our breath that we'll see the financial capital used that way.
Well, that leads me really to my next question, because we after these segments that involve immigration policies, the viewers tend to write in for tips. They just want to know what they could do to protect themselves, what they should be looking for. Do you have any final thoughts in terms of tips you would give to someone who's watching today who may not be documented?
Look, right now, I think it's too early to say that there's been a dramatic change. I think there's been in policy, there's been a dramatic change in tone. There's been a dramatic change in intent and motive. But so far, I think it's too early to say there's been a dramatic intent in the way that immigration law is being enforced on the ground. And primarily that's because ICE and the Border Patrol down along the U.S. Mexican border have not yet gotten that memo. They seem to still be operating as if it is the last few weeks of the Trump administration, and it will take some time for the Biden administration and a lot of effort for directives that come out of the White House and directives that come out of the Department of Homeland Security's headquarters in Washington, D.C., to actually make their way to field offices, whether that's in McAllen, Texas, or it's in the Bronx, or some in Washington State or Florida. It doesn't matter where it is. It will take some time before the agency and the people who are actually or actually turning policy into real on the ground decisions, get the memo that they are being expected to shift gears, and that's only going to happen if the administration from the highest reaches is forceful, is steadfast in making sure that there are consequences to ICE agents, for ICE agents and Border Patrol agents who do not get on board with the new administration's chosen priorities.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, Professor. It's great stuff. Hopefully you can come back in the next couple of weeks. Just maybe give us a little bit of an update on where we think the administration is heading. Until then, just stay safe, and I guess we'll speak to you soon.
It's been my pleasure, David.
All right. We'll be back with more Today's Verdict. Stay with us right after this. With Jodi Morales, a criminal defense attorney, and I was mentioning to Jodi before we were actually on air how the viewers really enjoy when the guest happens to have this particular expertise. So Jodi, thanks very much for coming on today. And maybe we could start off, what made you even decide to become a criminal defense attorney?
Sure. So it was really my internship at the Bronx Defenders, which is a community-based public defense organization that turned the tides for me. Initially, I thought I wanted to do family law. There wasn't space in the family law internship program that summer, but there was in the criminal defense program. But I quickly learned after a couple of weeks that criminal defense was really and truly what I wanted to do. And that was because I was able to connect with clients, many of whom looked like me, and many of whom didn't speak English, spoke mostly Spanish, who really were in need of representation from individuals who could identify with them. And so seeing that need really did push me toward a career in criminal defense.
Well, this is an interesting time to be a criminal defense attorney with the new administration coming in. Just from the onset, what are your thoughts? Anytime that usually the Democrats take control, you're going to see reform. What are your initial thoughts now that we have the Biden-Harris administration?
I think there will be lots of reform. I think it'll be slow, and I think that that's smart. We just came out of an administration that was extremely polarizing, and I think there are a lot of deep wounds felt by Republicans and Democrats from our previous administration. And I think that before we can actually make a significant change within the criminal justice system, we have to come to a basic consensus of how citizens should be treated within our country. I don't ever advocate for lawlessness. I don't think that anarchy is the right way to go, but we definitely need to revisit the manner in which we've been policing, communities of color.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter. Actually, just it's the first thing that really pops into my mind when it comes to reform. And you hit it right on the head. I mean, people of color, different neighborhoods have been targeted, and it's their time to really fight back. Where are we heading with the Black Lives Matter in terms of the criminal justice system? Maybe in terms of the mass incarcerations. What do you think as a defense attorney?
I think in general, and Black Lives Matter aside, I think in general, people of color are banding together to have stronger conversations and more meaningful conversations about how we can protect ourselves and how we can protect our neighborhoods. Separate and apart from a large organization, I think that the real work starts within smaller groups in the community, right? Who better to quote unquote police your community than your own community members? And I don't say police in the traditional sense, but I mean, feel a sense of accountability and ownership for the areas in which you're living in. And I've always felt that it really does begin, with small community-based organizations, even, your neighborhood watch. It may sound, corny or silly, but we've moved so far away from that, that we've allowed, folks from other neighborhoods who don't have the perspective to come in and kind of tell us how to run our neighborhoods. And that, of course, creates resentment and clashes and leads to some of the bigger problems we're dealing with now.
In 1994, Joe Biden, he really was instrumental in passing that crime bill, which led to massive mass incarceration. And now, and he took a lot of heat for it. And now he's in the White House. What are we going to do about the fact that our prisons are really so crowded? Do we really want, do we really want to let everybody out at the same time? What are your thoughts about mass incarceration at this point?
Well, it's interesting. I was thinking a lot about Kamala Harris's record and, all of the criticisms that she's faced for her, describing herself as a reformer, but in actuality, engaging in a lot of, programming and creating laws that actually hurt our people. I think that contradictions in criminal justice are just part of being a responsible prosecutor or a responsible defense attorney. I mean, you cannot have a one-size-fits-all response when you're dealing with human beings. And I think that over time, our lawmakers have realized that. I think Biden and Harris are now in a position where they really have to look back at their track record and think about how what they've done previously just doesn't match up with where we are now. I don't think that, we can responsibly just empty every prison. I know that there are a lot of people who think that that's the answer, but the reality is that we are then inviting bigger problems within our communities. We still haven't addressed the root issues of trauma, of psychological problems, of poverty. So if we don't address those things and we just release someone back into society, we're not really doing a service to anyone.
So when you're defending somebody and you're in, whether you're in criminal court, family court, wherever you are, how are you torn in some respects? Because I know you want to protect your client and you want to keep your client out of jail, but at the same time, we do want to get some treatment for some of the petty crimes because we don't want them to become, misdemeanors that become felonies. How do you balance that really?
I don't ever feel, well, I can't say ever. It's very rare that I feel torn about, representing someone. There aren't very many situations where I feel like, wow, I really just can't effectively represent this person, because I've always prided myself on looking at this person as someone who can benefit from some assistance, and it's not just someone choosing to do something that is not helpful to them or to society. There are lots of root issues that lead to the criminal justice system. And, it's our responsibility as criminal defense lawyers to really go the extra step. Sure, we can get you a good plea, but if we haven't, gotten you the services you need, you may be back here tomorrow. And then what's the point?
So Jodi, one before we let you go, because we don't have too much time, one tip you could give somebody who's watching today, in terms of their interactions with the police, what would you tell somebody who may have a problem coming up as a criminal defense attorney? Your best advice?
I would just say that less is more. Do not divulge information that is unnecessary. It really does make a difference in your case. Of course, you want to be respectful with police. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you are going to engage in a physical way that's not good. But I think the most important thing is to just keep your mouth quiet.
Well, Jodi, we will leave it there. Thanks so much. Great stuff. And hopefully you come back in the next couple of weeks, give us a few more tips.
All right. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. All right. Stay with us. Today's verdict has lots more. We'll be right back right after this. returning guest, one of our favorites, Andrew Rigie, the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, is here with us. Andrew, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Listen, I see how important you are. You're all over the place, and I can understand why. Let's talk a little bit about the restaurants, and let's talk a little bit about the winter. Listen, it's too cold for me to eat outside. I'll tell you right now, but I'd love to start eating inside. Tell me what's going on.
Thanks. Well, it's been absolutely devastating. Restaurants and our restaurant workers are the backbone of the city, and they've been devastated, decimated. We know thousands of restaurants have closed already. There was a report released by the state comptroller's office that said without adequate support, which we have not yet received, between 1/3 to 1/2 of the city's 25,000 eating and drinking establishments could shutter. And when it comes to our workforce, pre-pandemic, we employed about 325,000 New Yorkers. Over the past year, since the pandemic hit, we've lost more than 140,000 jobs. So it's a really dire situation. And I love hearing you say, you want to support restaurants because it is cold. So fewer and fewer people are eating outdoors. And because we lost indoor dining in December, when it really started getting cold, it was the worst time for that to potentially happen. But
I mean, we're still taking in here, with the delivery, we're still getting as much food as we can. It's not like we're cooking here, but it's not the same. And we'd like to get into the restaurants.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we're so grateful for everyone that's doing takeout and delivery, but there's the social aspect of eating out. That's why people love restaurants. If it's with significant others, just to see people, and be around.
Andrew, it's Valentine's Day. Okay. I'm not supposed to be in my kitchen during Valentine's Day or in my living room.
Yep.
Which leads me to the next question. Was there any impetus in terms of the fact that this big holiday is coming up for the mayor to open up at least 25%?
Yeah, so we've been advocating to reopen indoor dining safely. It's been open at 50% indoor dining around the rest of the state, except for in New York City. We've been basically completely shut out of it, even though we have lower hospitalization rates and lower infection rates than areas around the rest of the state that are open at 50%. So Valentine's Day is going to be a good day. Unfortunately, a lot of restaurateurs are heartbroken. They have to wait until then because it falls on a Sunday this year. So we're trying to get the governor and mayor to reopen indoor dining earlier, maybe Thursday, because that's a huge weekend. It's busy for restaurants, and because of the reduced occupancy, they can take fewer reservations. And we know people like you want to get out, so we're hoping we can bump it up a few days and make sure people get out to go eat, support their local restaurants, and hopefully have a romantic time.
Let's talk about the employees and vaccinations, because I sure would feel a lot happier if I know my server, host, whomever is vaccinated. What's going on with that?
Well, that's been a huge issue for us. Restaurant workers have been on the front line, feeding frontline workers, feeding the hungry, and really keeping the food supply of New York City going. And they've been in an extraordinarily tough position. So we're thrilled that just earlier this week, it was announced restaurant workers are now eligible for the vaccine. I know they started signing up. We're really encouraging and putting information out there so people can do it. So it comes at a great time. We really need to help serve and protect our workers that are really just doing such incredibly important work.
Are you getting any feedback that some New Yorkers are actually going out of the tri-state area to be able to eat indoors, or are you hearing any of that? I mean, I sometimes, see some things either on Facebook or different places that people are either going to Jersey or going to Connecticut, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I hear people from the Bronx are going right into Westchester County to go eat. In Queens, I hear people are going into Nassau County, and Staten Island is really easy to get into Jersey, so they're going to Jersey. So it's basically like we're this donut. There's no dining indoors in New York City, but there's indoor dining all around us. And these are in areas that have higher infection, higher hospitalization rates. So what we've been saying is, of course, public health and safety has to be paramount, but we also need the standards and requirements to be applied equitably to New York City restaurants and workers. So we're thrilled about the vaccine. We're really happy. We're going to be able to open up at 25%. We're hoping we can get to the 50% safely and very soon, because even at 50%, it's going to be so difficult for restaurants to really hang on. They're struggling so much. And of course, workers need to make money. So the more tables and people they can serve, the more they're going to make, the more hours they can get at the restaurants.
Right.
So
well, we have a new administration now, so there's more money coming, at least with the PPP loan. Are restaurants getting it? Are the restaurants that need it get it? I know the first time it came around, some of the big chains got it and some of the small guys were left out. What's going on with the money?
yeah, so I think it's a little bit more equitable, I hope. You know, you never know until you see the data. But the really good news is that the new Congress, our own Senator Schumer, who's now the majority leader, has been fighting for structured restaurant relief. And through reconciliation, they just passed a $25 billion grant fund that's going to be specific for restaurants. We're pushing for it to get passed through the House. And then, of course, we need the Biden administration to enact it. And get this bill called the Restaurants Act enacted, which is a larger version of this $25 billion, which would help pay for rent, utilities, payroll, vendor expenses. You know, let's not forget, it's not just the restaurant owners and restaurant workers, but think about the farmer upstate we buy our produce from, or the sales rep that sells beer, the local butcher shop where we get, you know, our cuts of meat from. They're all suffering because restaurants are shut or really severely limited in their operations. So it's the
and it is a trickle down, because even the restaurant workers who are not getting paid, or the owners, are then not spending money that's being put into the economy as well. It
exactly
just keeps going. Ultimately, I know you can't give me the exact answer, but how many restaurants do you think are not going to survive? What percentage do you think in New York City are not going to make it?
You know, if this money gets pushed out, I'm hoping it'll save a lot more. I mean, I think maybe a third could close. It's so hard to tell because of the uncertainty. The one thing that I also would say is that, you know, restaurants are being kept open artificially right now. So while we've lost thousands, there is a moratorium on commercial evictions at a state level, and the city has enacted a law that suspends the enforcement of personal liability guarantees in leases. These two policies have really kept restaurants in place. Otherwise, they would have been evicted and gotten out of the lease because they couldn't afford to have their landlords come after their personal assets. So it's really about how many are being artificially kept open. What I will say, to try to bring some optimism into it, is I have no idea that, no doubt, the restaurant industry is going to come back. I mean, eating, drinking, socializing, this is in the DNA of humans and in the DNA of cities. So I'm hoping we will see a restaurant renaissance, so to speak, or a roaring 20s when people are sick of the lockdowns. We can go out, we've been vaccinated, restaurants can open up. There'll be so many vacant storefronts, it'll probably bring the commercial rents down a little, providing new opportunities to go create really exciting new restaurants and bars. So I have no doubt we're going to come back. What we're fighting for right now is how do we mitigate the loss, because so many people have their lives invested in their restaurants, and it would be an absolute shame if they lose everything only for the city's restaurant industry to come back. So we need an equitable recovery.
I hear you, Andrew. It's Valentine's Day. Get out there, get to a restaurant, because I'm going to do it. I'm going to try and do it. And as usual, stay safe. We'll see you hopefully in a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two. You can give us an update.
Absolutely. Thanks, David.
Well, that's all we have for tonight. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you have an issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until the next time, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you in 2 weeks.